Hey, Family Twist listeners, we've got an extraordinary episode for you today. Our guest Karen shares a deeply personal and fascinating journey through adoption, identity, and reconnection. From the significance of her name to uncovering profound connections with her birth family, Karen's story is full of unexpected twists, heartfelt moments, and some jaw-dropping revelations. We touch on the cultural weight of names because, let's face it, being a Karen in today's world carries a whole different set of challenges. But for our Karen, it's so much more than a name. It's a legacy chosen by her adoptive dad, and it represents a connection to someone she holds dear. So get ready to hear about how a letter to Catholic Charities sparked a life-changing reunion, the uncanny timing of events with her half-sister, and how these experiences led Karen to become an adoptee competent therapist, helping others navigate their own adoption journeys. Let's jump in. Oh, Karen, welcome to Family Twist.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
I don't know if you've ever been accused of being a quote-unquote Karen, but we have a lot of Karens in our lives. My mother is Karen, and our sister-in-law is Karen.
I heard that. Yeah, it's a hard name.
Isn't it interesting how it just culturally we picked, you know what I'm saying?
As an adoptee, it's really confusing and hard for me because I have multiple names. And what's even the hardest thing is that my adoptive dad chose this name for me, and he passed away in 2008. I pride myself on my anti-racism. So when that became a thing, I really had a hard time with it. So
Our sister-in-law felt the same way. She's just like, it feels really unfair to kind of, pigeonhole so many people with, a great name. But I get it. It happens, but it's so interesting how it's like, it seems odd that it's a single name. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I have a good friend whose name is also Karen. I loved her approach. She's like, embrace it and keep them on their toes. Are you a good Karen or are you a bad Karen? And I'm like, oh, okay.
There you go.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
It's like Wicked, right?
Yeah.
Good witch or bad witch? I don't know.
Right.
Well, it's funny when I say my name, Kendall, and people would be like, excuse me. And I'm like, Kendall Jenner, but I'm the cute one. You know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
Because my name was going to be, my adoptive parents had chosen that name, whether they got a boy or a girl. So that's who that kid was going to be no matter what.
And you had a
was
birth
originally-
name.
Say it again.
You had a birth name, right?
It was Scott.
And I was Melissa.
Yeah. My birth name was Scott White. My dad's name is Scott Clark. And it's just these single syllable things that I'm not used to.
But, had he kept Scott, or we'd probably be calling him Scotty or some kind of fun nickname anyway.
But very cool.
Wow. All right. So let's get into your adoption story, Karen.
Yes. So I was born in August in 1976. I always knew I was adopted. My adoptive parents, they could not conceive. And so I always knew I was adopted, but you don't really know what that means. Enter Cabbage Patch Kid era. I started telling my friends that I was brought by a stork. Yeah. And so when I was 7, my mom was like, oh, no. There was no Cabbage Patch and no bird. There was another mom. And at that age, I learned all about sex. And I remember crying, but then I remember it being normalized in a way, which I really do appreciate. My mom was a science teacher, so I think she was able to explain it in an age-appropriate way. But then my imagination really kind of went wild. They explained that my birth parents were teens and they couldn't keep me. Foreshadowing here, I remember my 6th birthday just crying because I really wanted a sibling. And I knew that I couldn't get one, but I was really upset. I grew up in New Jersey. My parents lived there because of my dad's. And I was surrounded by families that had 3 or more children. It was very odd that there was just me. And everybody knew, all the parents were like, oh, she was adopted. She's their adopted child. And I remember being like, God, that doesn't sound good. So fast forward, it was just, part of me. I was an only child. I then married my college sweetheart and wanted to have kids, but I started to develop significant anxiety. we'd been married for a couple of years, and I started to recognize that something was not right. One morning on a Saturday, I woke up and when you sleep on your arm and you're like, I can't move. Well, that happened, but it was the entire side of my body. And it was a long period of time. And I was calling to my husband to get the phone because that was before like cell phones were at your whatever. Get the phone. I want to call my mom. I was full on panicking, thought I had a stroke or something. She calmed me down and she's like, listen, you really need to look into your birth records. You need to contact Catholic Charities, which is where I was adopted through. So it was like, okay, and she's like, call your doctor. This was a Saturday. On Sunday, I wrote a letter to Catholic Charities. Monday, went in to see my doctor. And I was like, I think I have a brain tumor, or I think I had a stroke. She's like, I think you have anxiety. But she was very sweet with me. That was March of 2005. In July, I got a non-identifying letter, which didn't say anything much different. But about that time, I had put something on adoption.com. Do you remember that site? It was like a post thing. And I put in the information that I had, but it was actually wrong because I had my birth weight wrong. There were a couple of small things, but I did say I was born in August and the hospital. Fast forward to December 7th, 2005, I got a call. Actually, my parents got a call at their house in Massachusetts for Karen Rafferty, which was my maiden name. My dad said, she's not Karen Rafferty anymore. She doesn't live here anymore, but I'll pass along the information. He called me at work and said something interesting, like, call this number. She was a search angel hired by my adoptive parents to find me. By the end of the day, I had been on the phone with I emailed, because there was no like social media, emailed picture of myself because they didn't really believe it. And I looked more like my birth mother at that time than her other children.
Oh, wow.
So by the end of the day, I was in touch with my biological maternal grandmother and half sister on my mother's side.
Oh, wow.
What they shared with me was that the day that I woke up feeling was the day that, unfortunately, they had to take my half sister off of life support because she had died from a seizure disorder.
Oh.
I would not believe this if I didn't line up the dates, but I have the letter that I sent to Catholic Charities, and I circled back with my doctor. I found out I just have a thyroid issue. When did I see you? And she said March 21st of 2005. And my half sister was taken off life support on March 19th. So that was intense. My adoptive family was very supportive of me communicating with them. My dad was always, they were both from large families, but he was more accepting of the fact that I was adopted. My adoptive mom wanted to be there. It was really hard for her because back in the 70s, not being able to conceive, there was some shame she felt. There was no, counseling. I'm sure if she really pursued it, but there certainly was no counseling in the sense of, if DNA comes along, which wasn't the case in mine. I know it was the case in yours, Kendall. We kept in touch. My siblings at the time were 23. I have 4 siblings on my birth mother's side. One had passed away, and I have 2 on my birth father's side. My birth mother did not exactly know where my birth father was, but had ways of getting in touch with him. It was super overwhelming. I coincidentally had a different doctor's appointment that day, and this woman said, you need a therapist. And I was like, so I took the first one that came along, and while she was very sweet, she kind of knew nothing in terms of adoption competent therapy. I remember going back to work, and this mentor of mine sat me down to tell me what happened. And I told him this whole story. He has become such an influential person in my life. He is the reason why I eventually went back to grad school to get a master's in social work, to become an adoptee competent therapist, which is what I do today, because I realized that there weren't enough out there to help. Or if there was an adoption competent, it was more, my view, it leaned more towards the adoptive parent side. And I didn't feel listened to or understood, really. So we met on the phone in December of 2005. In February of 2006, my adoptive mom and dad and my husband and I drove to New Jersey to meet with my birth mother, my birth father's wife, my birth mother's boyfriend, and eventually my 3 siblings on my birth mother's side.
Cool.
My husband took a video of it and he was crying throughout it. It was so cool. First thing we said to each other when we met was, me and my birth mother said, "You look like me." I still remember, it's something that if you have always had that genetic mirror, you don't get. It was so validating. Fast forward to later on that day. Now we've known each other for 5 hours. I am sitting in this room and my half sister comes around the corner. For the first time in my life, I had nonverbal communication with a biological family member. And my adoptive mother has 3 sisters and nieces. And there's always been this kind of chitter chatter in my house on holidays. And I remember being like, you guys are like speaking a foreign language. I don't understand what was kind of happening. And this is my mom.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I had that with my half sister that I had known for 5 hours, it was so awesome, but it was also heartbreaking. That bittersweet sweet feeling of, I missed this.
Mm-hmm.
Once I came home and really started to process, there were a lot of things like that continued. My birth mother's family lived walking distance to where I went to preschool, where my mother taught at the school that my siblings went to high school. Not at the same time.
Right.
Because we had moved. But I was explaining this to my husband. I said, do you ever imagine that maybe you went to a different school or dated a different person or did something different? I get to see in real time what my life would have been like. And that is freaky. Unfortunately, my adoptive mother started to have some intense feelings about that reunion. I've since learned it's not a great idea to bring your adoptive parents with you when you meet your birth family, but there was no handbook on that.
Yeah.
Right.
And they had been so supportive. I remember going to we lived like an hour away, like when I was living in New Hampshire, when my birth family found me, I was like an hour away from where my husband and I lived to my adoptive parents. And I remember going back and like just feeling it out. And my dad was like, yes. And my mom grabbed me by the shoulder. She said, Karen, I just want more people to love you. I was like, oh my God, this is really like, and I think that she absolutely wanted that. But the reality was she couldn't do that. I started to notice some weird things even that weekend where she's like, spend time with me, spend time with me.
Like it's not a competition, but she can't help but feel that.
There's no handbook for this. So
No.
it's like she went in with the best intentions,
Yes.
not knowing that maybe she's having feelings of, am I losing Karen? Am I losing part of Karen?
Yeah.
People will say, and I've heard spouses say when they experience somebody in reunion, they're like, okay, well, you didn't get to have this your whole life, but you've got it now. You're mourning the past.
Mm-hmm.
And now you can see what could have been.
Yeah.
You know, and I totally get it. For people who don't know adoptees or donor conceived people or NPEs, I can see that's where your mind would go like, oh, a happy ending for you. But it's like, yeah, but, you know.
It's such bittersweet. Like you can't put the tube back in the toothpaste.
Right.
And to see, even though I had a great life, but it's still this connection and recognizing that I missed out on that. And then to know that I never got the opportunity to meet a sister.
Yeah.
When I met my birth family, my youngest sibling is a boy. He was 10 years old. The sister that died was, I think he was probably the closest to, because at the end, she wasn't able to work or drive because of her condition.
Mm-hmm.
So she was home a lot and he was a little boy. So she'd get him off like to the bus. And so when we met, he said to me, are Karen and TJ going to come live with us? TJ's my husband. I was like, oh, sweetheart, no, you could be my child.
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time going back and forth to New Jersey to visit them because I had a great job and I didn't have children yet. And I could spend that time. And that was really important. Later was able for the first time that like in July, I met my half siblings on my dad's side, including his siblings. And they knew about me. They knew that he had a child when he was 15 and he was bullied. Like, I guess his football coach learned he had a child and made a comment. I think that it deeply impacted him in terms of like complex PTSD and like the trauma and not being able to really have the space to talk about that. What made the issue harder for my adoptive mom was in New Jersey in the 70s, the birth mother had all the power. Even if the birth father wanted to keep me, he had zero rights. My birth father's family fought to keep me for 2 years. They went to court. Ironically, they lived very close to us. When my adoptive mother found this out, it was as if she was finding this out at present day. And that was really tricky. My adoption was finalized when I was a little over a year old. They were not told that any of this happened. I remember at that time when my mother learned this, my adoptive mother saying, let's go to therapy. Let's talk about this. And she did not. She was unwilling. Pregnant with my first child in the spring of 2006. It was still very new where I was meeting my birth family and going to visit them. I got pregnant and I was so happy because I was nervous to be pregnant because I was nervous about medical stuff because I did have a lot of anxiety. My anxiety was from my adoption. I don't know about you, Kendall, but I really feared I was going to be kidnapped as a child because I was adopted.
I didn't have that.
No, that's good. I think I was just an anxious kid. I was nervous about knowing there was another mother that could come get me, I guess. So, but that's when I think me being pregnant struck another chord with my adoptive mother. And she was becoming very insecure with that. Fast forward to today, that baby is going to college in August. And that has become another amazing thing, having biological children, which I realize I'm really lucky to have and to have that mirroring because now I have these 2 daughters who get me and really the first biological family members I've ever lived with.
Yeah.
And then for them to go to college, like exactly what they're supposed to do. Adoption is like that bittersweet pill. It was that mentor that kind of grabbed me at work after he learned about my story that put the seed in my head. Like, hey, you said you always wanted to be a therapist. Like, it's never too late. In my 40s, when I realized I couldn't sustain the job I was doing because I hated it with 2 kids, I'm like, I'm going back to grad school. So now I work with adult adoptees and understand the clinical part, but really understand the personal part, which I hope is really validating because I think there are a lot of awesome adoptive competent therapists, but you don't get it if you're not adopted.
I agree.
I think there's going to be no shortage of patience for you because every day people are finding stuff out. Chances are somebody's going to say like, "Oh, I know of such and such," or they've a friend or family member. It's starting to become way more common. Yeah,
well, especially with DNA kits and
right.
Ancestry.com. I remember one year my husband's old job gave them 23andMe. People were calling me. This was before I was even a therapist, being like, "I kind of know you went through this. What do you do?" And I'm like, oh gosh, this is opening Pandora's box. They're a sperm donor, egg donor, whatever it is, and parent may have passed or whatever. So I think those tools are awesome, but know what they could be opening.
We're right around the holidays right now. And so I'm sure people are going to be giving them as gifts because it's fun and we get to see exactly where we're from. And
we Irish?
Oh, wait, dad's not my dad.
Yeah. Yeah.
How do you feel about what you went through medically and then finding out how your sister passed at the same time?
It made sense for me that I was anxious. I always thought I was the kid that My parents would bring me to the doctors and they'd be like, okay, well, tell us about any of this in your family. And then, oh, she's adopted. And then I'd get this look from the doctors, like, you're this mystery. And so I always had a lot of tests. When I was 15 and like kind of starting to think about college and doing SATs and all that crap, I was always a stomach issue. And so I had like a colonoscopy by the time I was 15. I am glad for the medical intervention. However, I had anxiety. I don't have anything clinically wrong with me physically, which I am so grateful for. But I do wish there was more emphasis on the anxiety part and there wasn't that shame. I'm glad I kind of had that intense emotional feeling because it prepared me to send the letter to Catholic Charities. I had that really honest, open conversation with my adoptive mom about it at that time. She had said like, oh, I'm here for you if you have any questions, but they really didn't know anything other than basics. For me to know that I physically experienced that the day my sister passed, so I wouldn't believe it if it didn't happen to me. I do feel in some sense that she had a part in this. And I then learned from my birth mother and half siblings that they found out about me late January or February before she passed. When she passed in March, she was like, I'm going to get us on Oprah. We're going to have a big reunion. Because she couldn't work, she did this deep dive to try to find me. And she passed before that happened.
Sorry. The timing was just crazy for you.
Yes, so odd.
Wow. I am curious. You mentioned that you got to meet your maternal grandmother.
Mm-hmm.
Did you also get to meet your father's mother?
Yes.
Because it tugged at my heartstrings when you said that for 2 years they were trying to keep you. And so, I was hoping at least you got to meet the woman who was trying to make that happen.
I did. And that was wonderful. I went to my birth father's house and my paternal grandmother was there. My paternal grandfather had passed at that time. He had several siblings. I'm still in touch with my paternal cousin. I was blocked by my half sister the day before the election this year because we don't agree politically. Unfortunately, after Trump was elected in 2016, I was very surprised that they were supportive of him. And I had questioned that. And that's really where our relationship kind of stopped being as close, unfortunately. And I'm still in touch with my maternal grandmother often. I mean, she is maybe monthly, I will talk to her. And that is wonderful. Like, she is very with it. She is very kind. She really, really only wanted the best for me. My paternal grandmother has since passed. But it is sad to me that I'm not close with my siblings. They have kids, and it's also really, my children are 17 and 15. But they're like, yeah, we have like cousins are we going to see them? And I'm like, honey, it's just not the same. And I remember this one time when one of my sisters was getting married and I said to her, or maybe I even said to my husband, I basically was saying to my children, like, we're not going to go. And my kids were like, Mommy, why? And I was like, I'm a spectacle. Like, I don't want to take away from her day, and it just wouldn't be fair to share that. That's not why I'm there. So I'm going to support her from afar. But I know and again, with the loss that they've had, to gain a sister again, that was quite a time for them. And their extended family that knew the sister that passed. So, it's complicated.
Isn't it? It's the things that you never expect that you're going to have to consider.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like,
yes.
And and everybody hears me talk about my biological mother's side of the family and how, delusional I was
know.
about,
I know.
it's all going to be rainbows and,
Yes.
and it just isn't. And I
That
don't know.
resonates for me because I remember like a couple months into my reunion and I was absolutely on cloud nine,
Yeah.
and I remember my husband saying to me, well, Karen, like, I don't remember the context, but it was kind of like, but what if it doesn't work out? And I was like,
Yep.
what are you talking about? I felt like it was like a gut punch. And he's like, no, I'm not like saying I hope this, but he was really very realistic. And I was so idealistic, Corey.
He
But
really tried
yeah,
to ground me. It
yes,
was impossible for him to do, but
yes. And
I'm along for the ride.
exactly. And same with my husband. He was like, yes, I just want the best for you. He's like, but what
yep.
if? And I just, it was inconceivable to me that it wouldn't be rainbows, butterflies, and unicorns.
I agree completely. And I still am surprised sometimes. You know what I mean? 7 years in, I'm like, what's wrong with these people? You know what I mean? Like, and that sounds awful for me to say, but it's like,
I know.
what's your deal? But I think as the person who's adopted, because you've kind of created almost like a little fantasy world about how it could be, that you're like, oh, I finally found the people. When I stop and think about it, my birth mother's other children didn't even know I existed, whereas my birth father's children did. So I think the dynamic is going to be different automatically that way, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm this person that infiltrated, or, they feel sometimes, infiltrated the family. And it's like, but you're my family too.
All right, we're pausing there because that's a lot to unpack. Incredible stories, Karen. Thank you so much for opening your heart and sharing your journey with us. Your story is such a powerful reminder of how complex and meaningful these connections can be. From the bittersweet moments to the incredible resilience you've shown, it's very inspiring. And to our listeners, if Karen's story resonated with you, or if you have your own family twist story to share, we'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with someone who might need to hear it. As always, we're so grateful you're part of the Family Twist family. Until next time, when we get back into Karen's journey, remember, family isn't just who you're born to. It's the connections we make, the stories we share, and the love we build. See you soon. The Family Twist podcast is presented by Savoir Faire Marketing Communications and produced by How the Cow Ate the Cabbage, LLC.